Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today we will discuss why mind-body symptoms are actually a sign of progress in your life, even if they require some work to get past effectively. In this episode, you'll hear about the curious observation that so many people develop symptoms after developing the good parts of their personality, how to think about this developmentally, and why this thinking can help you feel far less panicked about symptoms and be able to see the path to recovery more clearly. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally. And finally, you can reserve your place in one of my seminars or purchase any of my mind-body guides, also known as the PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Now, without further ado, here is a look at how to understand the onset of mind-body symptoms as a sign of a developmental step forward, even if the symptoms must also be resolved. As is always the case, I am continuing to work on an understanding of mind-body symptoms and what they signify about the world and about ourselves. Each observation I make leads to questions, and invariably, by thinking about the questions, answers. It is through this process of observation, questions, and answers that fit with the facts, science, and logic that I come to have such certainty in things. This is why we should never stop observing and unearthing questions, confusion, uncertainty, or even fear. Now, if you've been listening to or watching me for long enough, you'll recognize that was my definition of doubt. Doubt isn't just something to get rid of. It is something to be used for good purpose. It is the very thing that leads us to keep observing, to keep asking questions, and ironically, it then becomes the thing that leads to certainty in the end. I'll give you an example that has come to mind a bunch of late. I have noticed on multiple occasions in striking degrees that people who get better psychologically are actually more likely to develop mind-body symptoms. For many of us pain and symptom sufferers, we have always been goodists, which really does mean that we were doing pretty well psychologically speaking, not only with respect to our interactions with others in the world, but even in how we could view ourselves. In fact, Sarno has said that the number one cause of back pain is having children, not because we are lifting them, but because it is an experience that places such huge responsibility on our backs. And I would argue that, while people can become better people in many ways, having children can also provide a move forward in this, because empathy levels can change with the tremendous love people can have for their kids. Becoming better, I'll put in quotes, once again shows connection with developing symptoms. But I have been blown away by recognizing what happens to non-goodists when they begin to get better. Very, very frequently, these people, who were once a bit difficult for others, or maybe even a whole lot difficult for others, but are now getting along with others quite well, develop back pain and other symptoms, right after getting better. Where they had once had interpersonal conflict and nothing bothering them much physically in any chronic way, they now have, often for the first time, very difficult physical symptoms. Which begs the question, is getting better psychologically really all that it's cracked up to be? Or will it lead to symptoms? From the viewpoint of the sufferer, it's an understandable and legitimate question. Of course, it is better to get along with other people and to increase your adaptivity in the world. But if it so often comes at the cost of crippling pain and other symptom suffering, how much should individuals really want to achieve this goal? What do I mean by this? What I mean is twofold. One, it is a temporary stop on our journey in life rather than something to which we are doomed. And two, this temporary stop is absolutely necessary to get to where we need to go. Living a good life where we feel in power with ourselves, others, and our symptoms. The very fact that people get better psychologically, then get worse with mind-body symptoms, and ultimately are able to utilize the symptoms to get to a much more self-actualized and at peace experience, shows that it is a progression. This is very important to keep in mind because it is part of how people can remember to not panic when mind-body symptoms emerge. It is, in fact, a sign of progress towards good living. I will grant you it isn't fun progress, and I will also grant you that, because no one has understood it very well before, it is progress that is obscured and even develops in a way that does not allow for the easiest development forward. Which brings up another question. If the symptoms are really for progress, why do they present in a way that obscures things, often leaves people stagnated, enraged, and hopeless? The answer to this lies in the nature of the unconscious process and our ambivalence about becoming powerful. We want to progress, but we also are scared to, or even don't want to, at the same time. The symptoms are there because they are expressing two sides of the ambivalence. The key here is to learn to speak the language of the symptoms so that the scared part of us that doesn't want to grow can become conscious and no longer stand in the way, while the part of us that is excited to grow finally gets to drive. For the people who got better psychologically, essentially becoming goodists, as many who went to therapy against their own wishes end up becoming, it should be looked at as an intermediary step in the process. This is also important from the vantage point of how we think of therapy goals. So much of the time, the world thinks that the person should just be more adaptive and do a good job in their environment, as if this will make the person happy. What these therapists are missing is that the work, to that point, has made people better, but not yet happier. Once the person is better, I put in quotes again, they are then free to grapple with their suffering in just the way they always would have if there had been room for them to know their true story. It's as if we all have been suffering at some level, but not about the central aspects of our story. The core narrative and power column allow us to engage with our suffering where it really hurts and finally resolve it. That is why the work is not done when the person is better. It is done when they are not only better, but also at peace with themselves, aligned with their core, and happier in the broad sense, since we can't be happy every day with the ups and downs of life. Think of development in 3 phases. 1, the struggle to navigate the demands of the world against the things we want for ourselves. 2, the real central struggle within us that is revealed by our symptoms. And 3, the resolution that comes in understanding ourselves through understanding and resolving our symptoms. When seen in this developmental light, with its 3 steps, it really does seem to be the magic number, doesn't it? We find one of the hallmarks of my system once again. It may not be easy, but it is simple to understand what is happening. One last conundrum that I want to address about the phenomenon of pain and symptoms emerging once people get better. What do we make of goodists in this context? What did they do with the first stage of development? The fact is that, through some combination of nature, nurture, and trauma, they learned to manage their conflict with the environment pretty well, for the environment. This is the definition of a goodist. They already are attending to the needs of others ferociously, so there isn't a whole lot of room for growth in our giving to other people. But for goodists, getting better actually means something different. It means doing a bit less for other people and taking care of ourselves. Goodists go through the same developmental paces as everyone else, but from the opposing angle. Goodists do not usually start hurting all the time right away, either physically, and this must mean something. If we think about that observation, what comes to mind is that goodists, too, are able to function in the world without pain or symptoms for a long time, and then something must shift when they can no longer operate in the same way. This is exactly what happens, in fact. Goodists settled into a way of operating in the world, just like non-goodists. That is how they manage the conflict, though, by self-sacrifice. But whether you are a goodist or a non-goodist, you will hit a breaking point because the solutions we come to in childhood never work well enough. It's expecting far too much of an adult to always get it right, let alone a child. Now, goodists really can't take as much as they used to. And, you know what? This is a good thing once they get to that point. Goodists, and I count myself among them, need to learn how to engage with the world on their own behalf more, rather than always moving aside for others. They can still be goodists, but no longer without symptoms. Once symptoms are understood, doubt and fear removed, and the message received, now they can be the best version of themselves. Still goodists, but with realistic limitations and self-needs, along with no symptoms. When your system of living doesn't work anymore, you actually take a step forward. This is when symptoms come in. So if you're there, congratulations are partially in order, along with a much larger dose of empathy and commiseration. Symptom life in its seemingly chronic forms is actually a transitional space, the second of 3 developmental phases. Recognizing this developmental norm, which emerges out of logical conclusions from clear observations of patterns, is one of the ways we can most relax about where we are headed. When you are having symptoms, you cannot possibly be doomed to them once you know what they are, because development is always in the works, and the part of you that wants to develop will get there. Developmentally, the 3rd phase always awaits you. All you need is the right information, a sense of the process, and maybe some guidance in what to do when you are working through the 2nd phase. But everyone can get there. Everyone wants to get there. We all work the same, We all develop the same overall, and the only thing that has been missing to do so is the correct information. I really hope you enjoyed this episode on how to view symptoms as a sign of progress in the pathway of development towards freedom from chronic symptoms coupled with fulfilled living. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally.